Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Laptop Retrospective because I've been wanting to make this one for a little while. If you are a ThinkPad fan, you will know that there are books written on ThinkPads. And there are some very popular books that are written on ThinkPads, but the one I want to talk to you about today is probably one of the most important of those books. And if you enjoy or want to know anything about mobile computing, this is, in my mind, mandatory reading. I'm of course talking about The Race for Perfect Inside the Quest to Design a Portable Computer, written by Steve Hamm. Now, there's a lot of things that make this book incredibly important, not only for ThinkPad fans, but laptop designers in general. If you take a look at this book at face value, you will see that it actually does feature the X300 promo photo on the cover of the book. And on the back, it actually will tell you not only pretty much the entire inside story on the development of the X300, but it gives you an inside look going all the way back to the Dynabook when it comes to mobile computing. As far as I am aware, and as far as Steve is aware, this is pretty much the history so far of mobile computing when it comes down to laptop and laptop technology. Now, of course, it only goes up until the release of the MacBook Air and the X300 before things start to obviously run out of steam, because that's when the book was published. But that's still a lot of history that is really hard to find anywhere else. Steve, when he wrote this book, interviewed a lot of people, not just inside of Lenovo, but people that were movers and shakers in this industry from its infancy. If you are doing any research on laptop design, going all the way back to the very beginning when we're looking at the Dynabook concept, grid computers, the very first ThinkPads, you name it, it's probably mentioned in this book. The level of information that Steve Hamm had access to when he wrote this book was pretty much unprecedented at the time, and I think even now. You need to understand, and perhaps I'll let David Hill say it best, that there was very few things that, if anything, that he did not have access to when writing this book.
Well, there was a huge amount of angst in the industry as to what was going to happen with ThinkPad. Many people thought that the Chinese were going to ruin it. Like, this is it. It's the end. They're going to make it cheap and cheerful, and it's all the ruggedness and the quality of engineering and the design would just go right down the drain. And so my feeling about this was, well, the way to combat this is to make the best ThinkPad ever made. Make one so awesome that IBM wouldn't even have done it. I mean, to me, that was like, this is how you prove it. You don't come up with a new design and prove that you're, stupid and pride the Jaguar off the hood of the car. you prove to the world that ThinkPad better than IBM. And so we had this whole project, and we were working on many different design models of different concepts around that. And that's actually where I met Steve Hamm. Steve was in town in Raleigh and met with the chairman, YY. And I think they had a break in the action or something. I don't remember exactly. But they brought him down to the design lab and said, hey, this is Steve Hamm. He's from Business Week magazine. He's got like 20 minutes. Can you show him something? I'm like, okay. So I said, well, what can I show him? They said, well, he's on a non-disclosure agreement. You can show him anything. I said, okay. So I showed him what we were doing, and he was so fascinated with it. He said, I want to write a book about it. And so we gave him a complete insider view of exactly what was happening. He went to Japan. He went to Italy and met with Richard Sapper. He met with Naito-san. I remember Naito-san was kind of funny. I had an interlock call with Naito-san, and we had a regular kind of call or meeting about various topics. And he said, hey, do you know this guy, Steve Hamm? I said, yeah, I do. He said, I met him in Japan. He knows everything. I said, yeah, he does. We've been talking to him and showing him all this stuff. And I said, what did you do? And he said, well, I figured it must be okay. So I showed him everything. I said, well, It is okay. Well, it was also completely counter to anything IBM would ever do. IBM never would have shown anything like this. And we in fact told Steve, hey, this whole thing could die. We could work on this thing for 6 months and then somebody wake up and say, we're killing the whole project. I said, so you got to be prepared for that. I've worked on things before at IBM. I've worked on them for a year and they died for various reasons. But he was like, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. And, it ended up being a cover story of Business Week magazine. And the book.
So as you can see, a lot of research was pulled from this book for not just the X300 videos, but videos that I haven't even made yet. If you wanted to know where some of the information came for the ThinkLight video, it's in here. If you want to know where information for Project came from, it's in here. It's just such a great book, and I think the biggest tragedy is that more people don't know about it and more people aren't reading it. But the good news is you can still read this book. You can find a physical copy. Digital ones are everywhere. I really think that this is an underappreciated book if you're a ThinkPad fan, and it's definitely required reading if you are. But again, if you're also a designer, it really does bear reading as well. So it does go through the entire history, and it's told like a pretty well run narrative. There are stories in here that you will not find anywhere else, as well as some interesting photographs that were shared when he was interviewing some really key people, including Richard Sapper himself in Milan. There's an awful lot to get out of this book, again, if you're a ThinkPad enthusiast or even just someone that's super curious about laptop design and where it has gone and where it could possibly end up. If you know of any other books that do as good a job of this, I would love to hear about them in the comments below, because I don't think that this sort of content gets enough coverage, and I hope that making this short little video today will introduce this book to some of you that may not have heard of it. And there will also be some more content coming very soon, because I had the opportunity to sit down with Steve Hamm just a couple of days ago and ask him some questions, not only about this book, but about laptops in general and technology. Just to give you a sneak peek, we're going to end the video with a clip from that interview.
I was at Business Week and I was covering IBM, and I think I started covering IBM in 2004, and I think it was in late 2004, if I have it right, that they announced they were going to sell their PC division, which was essentially ThinkPad. That was where the value was. And, they just didn't want to be in, quote, commodity hardware. And, I think they had put a lot of money and effort and engineering into ThinkPad, and it was a great product line with tremendous innovation in it. They'd put some from their PC division, but also some of their researchers, IBM Research, had put some stuff into it. And they saw it wasn't their future, and they kind of put it up for sale. And I don't think, I can't remember who bid on it, but Lenovo, which had just changed its name to Lenovo from Legend, which was the leading Chinese PC company, was the bidder. And, they didn't pay very much for it. I think it was maybe $1.5 billion, and but IBM, I think, as I recall, they had a phrase they called revenues that didn't produce profits empty calories. Oof. So and ThinkPad, unfortunately for them, was an empty calorie thing, because it cost a lot of money, and they were selling a high quality product into a commodity marketplace that was very price sensitive. So they really couldn't make money on it. And then, at the ultra high end, there was Apple, and they really, as good as ThinkPad was for the business market, it wasn't really a multimedia machine. And Apple had that, and they could charge the premium, and they had the great brand. So, so IBM sold it, and Lenovo bought it, And I say very shortly, I met Yang Yang, who is the chairman. He was at that time a young man. This was 15 years ago. Well, maybe he isn't. He was probably in his 30s, I guess. But he was a very entrepreneurial guy and a good leader, even as a young man. And he was really, he had the founders. He wasn't one of the founders, but he'd been brought in as the first president who wasn't a founder. So he was a guy who grew up in a China that was changing. The founders they were part of a Chinese government research organization, but they were allowed to spin out this company at a time of liberalization. But they were always kind of a quasi, it's part of state capitalism, really. And how does that really work? And who really controls it, kind of thing. But Yang Ching was clearly, he was going to take it into the world, and he did. And I think he did a really good job. I mean, they had a couple of American CEOs. One, the IBM guy who was kind of stuck with it for a year, and then he was gone. They brought another American in, and he was with it for about 4 years. I think what really happened was the Chinese kind of learned what the leaders learned what they needed to know from these Americans to run the company, and then they ran it. But it remained a company, a global company. Lots of Americans, some Europeans, Japanese engineering. I think still is a very important part. Though I think the Chinese brought some industrial design to it, but I would say that the core engineering that has stuck with ThinkPad is still Japanese. So anyway, that was really cool. And just as I think you recorded an interview with David where he described meeting me, and it was down in North Carolina, which was then the headquarters of the company. And I had just expressed interest in, as the company was transferred from IBM to Lenovo, I just kind of went with it. I mean, I didn't leave covering IBM, but I was interested in seeing what happened with this. It was really a global phenomenon. And I could see that Lenovo could become the largest PC maker in the world. And it wasn't, just a few years later, they were. So it was but to be invited into the process of following a new product that was being developed because of the pride of the people in the company, but also because of the ambition of the Chinese leadership to show this isn't some junk, cheap stuff we're making. We're gonna innovate within an industry where innovation really had dropped off. I think it's picked up again in a lot of ways, but that was it. And so to be inside of it was great. And so I followed it, and I think I probably talked to David every week for 6 months or something like that, and then he would tell me who else to talk to, and I think I talked to Richard Sapper in Italy. I just happened to be on vacation in Italy with my family. We were in Venice, and I said, hey, let's go over to Milan. There's a guy over there, and it would be fun to meet him. And we met him in his apartment. And the funny thing was, I'm trying to think how it went. Oh, I was interviewing him and probably tape recording it. I handed my little. I must have had some kind. I forget what camera I had at the time. Oh, it was some kind of regular camcorder. I handed it to my wife and I said, you shoot some video while I'm doing this. And she shot some video, but she wasn't used to camcorders, so she turned it on its side at a certain point. She said, "Oh, that was a better frame it was a better composition." And I later looked at it and I said, "Holy shit!" And I said, "That's not going to work." So anyway, it was wonderful, and at the end, there's a dramatic moment which you never when you embark on this, you don't know what will happen. Will it even be a product? And then there was the day that they had essentially finished their product but not launched it yet, and Apple launched their ultra thin computer, and of course these guys flipped out and said, "Oh my God, we put all this work into this thin computer, and then they're just gonna take all of our energy." But then it turned out that I get the Apple showed, oh, you could slip it inside a Manila folder envelope, and the guys from Lenovo ran and got an envelope, and it just barely fit inside. It was a little bit of a tight fit, but anyway, that was a pretty good story. And the book, unfortunately, I really enjoyed doing the book, but it came out right as the financial crisis 2008 hit, and there was, like, there was no merchandising, there was no marketing, there was no advertising, there was nothing. So I think that I mean, I would have hoped that it reached a broader audience, but it really didn't sell well. I don't really know how much it sold, but nevertheless, I look back on it and say I'm glad I did it, because for various reasons, because it was interesting, but also I don't think anybody had ever written the story of mobile computing, because that's built into it too. I go right back to the beginning of mobile computing, and I tell the story, and I still don't think it's ever been told. So that's the book where it is, and it's important to have the history, you know.